Hey there, this is Matt Gorman with dothemiles.tv. Today we're talking about power output and energy expenditure calculations. We've broken this video into two parts. This is going to be part one on power output calculations. Power is the source of the energy that we transfer from our bodies into the bike. And power is the great tool to measure to assess our energy expenditure. For a long time, heart rate has been seen as kind of like the go-to analog for assessing energy expenditure. Under controlled laboratory environment, there's a very close correlation between heart rate and power. However, outside in the real world, that correlation seems to break down a little bit. There are a lot of other environmental and physiological things that are at play around heart rate that have very little to do with the energy that we're actually putting into the bike. So for that reason, we actually want to look at the source of our energy, which is our power. Power is a direct measure of the training load on our bodies from exercise or such as cycling or stimulus, whereas heart rate is a measure of the adaptive response to that stimulus. So for that reason, we want to go straight to the source, power. So what is power? Power is a unit of work or energy over time. Work and energy are the same thing. Energy manifests itself in the world in a multitude of ways. We have potential energy, kinetic energy, thermal energy, electrical energy. The energy that we're talking about is the energy in motion, which is kinetic energy. Power is work or energy over time, and work is force times distance. So here's an example. If I want to push an object 2 feet, and to do so requires me to press against it with 10 pounds of force, I'm not saying the object weighs 10 pounds, I'm saying I've got to apply 10 pounds of force against it to move it 2 feet. 10 pounds of force, I'm moving it 2 feet. It is said that I've done the work of 20 foot-pounds to get that box to move, or that object to move those 2 feet. So that is work. So then power then is force times distance over time. Now when we go out and ride our bikes, we don't get behind the bikes and push them down the road. We get on the saddle and we turn the pedal cranks. So we've got to introduce this term of torque. So what is torque? Let's think for a minute that we have a nut or a bolt that's really tight and we have a wrench and we're trying to loosen it. So say the wrench handle is 10 inches long and we're pushing down and when that thing's not budging. So we get a longer wrench, now a 20-inch handle, and we have more leverage so we can push down with the same amount of force, but all of a sudden that bolt or that nut gets loose because we were able to get more torque by the fact that we have a longer lever or a longer wrench. So torque is just the force applied times the radius, like in the length of the wrench. And it is no accident that torque has the same units as force times a unit of linear measurement, the radius, as does work. So if torque is radius times force, we cancel both sides by the radius to get force to be equal to torque divided by radius. So then if force is represented by torque divided by radius, now we've got to focus on our distance. So if I have these two levers, and we'll say that the red one is twice as long as the blue one, if I turn these around at the same revolutions per minute, or my angular speed, say I'm turning these around at 100 revolutions per minute, okay? Now, this lever is the radius, double it is the diameter, times pi is the circumference, and the same with the blue. So if this red line is twice as long as the blue line, then the distance around this red circle is twice as long as the distance around this blue circle. We'll say this is 50 inches around. We'll say this is 25 inches around. And if I move both of these levers around at 100 revolutions per minute, my angular speed, then this is moving around a linear distance of 50 times 100, or 5,000 inches a minute, and this is moving around a linear distance of 100 times 25 inches, or 2,500 inches a minute. So this has a linear speed twice as fast as this, the linear speed of the blue, even though they're both going around at the same angular speed. So it's knowing the radius that I can convert the angular speed into a linear speed. So if we think of linear speed as speed, and driving in a car and say I'm going 40 miles an hour, that's my linear speed, right? and I tell you I drove 40 miles an hour for 2 hours, you will know that must have traveled 80 miles. You've taken my speed times my time. In much the same way, we've taken our angular speed, and with radius we converted it into our linear speed, and we multiply it by time to get our linear distance, just like the 40 miles an hour times the 2 hours. So now we have power is force times distance over time, and that's where we want to be. Now here's where the beauty of math really shines upon us. The radius in the numerator, radius in the denominator, they cancel out. The time in the numerator and the time in the denominator, they cancel out. We're left with power equaling torque times angular speed, and angular speed, as we said, is basically just our cadence, our revolutions per minute. So if we want to increase power, we have two things that we can do. We can either pedal at the same speed and go to a bigger gear, thus requiring more torque to keep up that same pedal speed, or we keep into the same gear and we simply pedal faster. Now you might ask, now Matt, didn't you say that torque is just force times radius? So can't I just extend the length of my crank arm on my bike and thus get a longer radius and I'll get more torque? Well, not really, and here's why. If we increase the length of our crank arm length and our radius, we are also increasing the size of the circle that we must move that pedal around with our foot. If we increase this by 5%, which is not insignificant by the way, we would also then be increasing the circumference of the circle. We must move this around, so it's a complete wash. To remember here, these two radiuses cancel each other out, so it doesn't matter what we do with the radius or the length of the crank arm length. There is nothing mechanically that we can do to alter our power other than go to a bigger gear or pedal faster. Now, environmentally speaking, there are things that can be done against us that will increase our power. Cycling is basically just putting energy from our body into the bike to combat resistance. And on a flat, smooth road with no wind, that resistance is basically just the rolling resistance of the bicycle against the road. Now, if we start to increase that resistance, whether it be going uphill or we're hitting a headwind, we now have to put forth more work to combat that increase in resistance. So it does require more work and more power to hold on to that same pedal speed in the same gear. Conversely, if we start to go downhill a little bit or we get a tailwind, less power or less work is required by us to maintain that pedal speed in the same gear. This has been Matt Gorman with dothemiles.tv. We've been talking about the calculations around power output, and we'll see you in part 2 when we talk about the calculations around energy expenditure.